Hello, I'm JoAnne Himmelman, Curator for the Museum of Lennox in Addington, and today we are at Macpherson House, a historic house that we manage, and we're going to be touring through the house today, looking at the period rooms and enjoying some of the furniture as well as the textiles that are on display. With me we have Susi Reinink, who is our resident weaver, and she has woven some of those projects that we see in the rooms. And hi, Susi.
Hi, Joanne. I'm looking forward showing you this beautiful house and all the artifacts in here. I've been a volunteer for many years, actually from the start of with the renovations of the restoration of the house, and it's a big part of my life.
Falls have played a central part in the history and development of the town of Napanee and the county of Lennox and Addington. While the original meaning of the word Napanee has been lost, it is speculated that it comes from Apanea, an indigenous word for falls and the river that flows through the area. In 1826, Alan and Mary built a stately house on the north bank of the Napanee River, the first house to be built north of the small community development near the falls. By 1834, Napanee had a population of 300 people with new stores and dwellings springing up. And here we are in the summer kitchen of the house. When it got hot, all of the work that primarily was done in the basement in the cellar kitchen was moved upstairs into this wing. We were able to close the doors off, and all of the heat that would have been amassed in the kitchen would stay here outside of the main house, trying to keep the house nice and cool. Like today's kitchen, this kitchen was the heart of the house, and Mrs. Macpherson would have come in and given her daily orders to cook and some of the domestic staff, but she would have left, and this room was very busy, very bustling. Some of the jobs that would have been done in this room included the cooking, also the washing of the dishes, the laundry, soap and candle making. There was a farm attached to this house, so during the busy harvest season, this room would have been very busy with farm hands and other domestic staff coming and going to prepare for that long, cold winter. One of the big jobs of the house would have been the weaving, and a loom would have been on site, most likely in the attic or in the barn, and it would have been done by a traveling craftsman, and primarily males 150 years ago. And the weaving would have been done, and then they would have moved on to the next household. And today we are lucky enough that we have a resident weaver at Macpherson House, and she actually came on board about 50 years ago, and she saw the dilapidated loom in the kitchen and wanted to learn how to do that. So she brought it together, and Susi Reinink is here today and has made a career out of weaving, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to her.
My life is certainly very much intertwined with this house, and particularly with this loom. It's actually this loom that has started me weaving. I have been a volunteer in the house from its inception of the restoration of the house. As a volunteer, it used to be more of a volunteer-run museum, and this loom was just in the corner of the summer kitchen here. Excuse me. And nobody was working on it. It was supposed to be a living museum, so I asked, why isn't anybody using it? And nobody knew how to. So I said, okay, I'll start getting lessons and start weaving. So that is the start of my weaving career. I took some lessons. I felt, I afterwards got private lessons of a professional weaver, and then I felt confident enough to restore the loom. It was set up with only 2 shafts, and I could see that it should have been a 4-shaft loom, especially for creating the coverlets of the 1800s. So luckily enough, they let me go in the attic of the house, and I found some of the treadles and some of the shafts here. So I was technical enough to be able to restore the loom to 4 shafts so that I could weave coverlets like I'm doing now again. Over the years, I have woven, I think, 18 coverlets, and I'll show you later a few that I have woven here on this loom. It's a very challenging loom, and it takes me probably about 3 to 4 times longer to do it on this loom than compared to a loom at home, the Leclerc looms. I'll show you why. First of all, to dress the loom, the old barn looms were set up in such a way that you dress from the front to the back. And the area here is wide enough, big enough, to put one of the chairs there and sit to thread the loom. Of course, the slaying I have done conveniently at home on a table. I could have done it here, but it was nicer to do it at home. And so basically, I had the reed in here, put my chair in here, and then thread it right sitting here. After that, of course, it had to be fastened to the rod of the warp beam, and then it had to be tied onto the breast beam, or the cloth beam. As you can see, the loom is very crudely put together with some wooden beams, some dowels, some cords, and the string handles. I mentioned that it takes me so much longer to weave here, and I'll explain to you why. First of all, I sit there, so if I have to advance the warp, I have to crawl out of the loom, take the tension off, and then pull this stick out to put it in the next slot and unwind the warp, advance the warp. Unfortunately, those holes here are not always lined up. So as you can see here, I have to tie it down with some string so that it doesn't get unlodged. They must have taken the very first tree in the backyard to put their warp on, because it's enormously uneven with bumps and humps. And so I am using either the warp slats, but preferably very heavy paper. So now I'm ready to weave, and I'll go around it and show you how I'm doing it. I just started a new coverlet, and it's called, well, you're probably familiar with the pattern. It's the Johann Speck pattern of Margaret Davison. I actually made another one just previously to it, and I'll show you that later, because the background of it is navy with a white background, with a white pattern. The original coverlets were usually an off-white, of course, with the pattern thread, the contrasting color. I sometimes reverse it. I do warn people, though, not to use very dark colors for the warp and the abbey weft. It's very difficult to work with. However, this one is much easier with the lighter colors. I'll put some more tension on to get good tension. As you can see, I don't have a crank that I can do like that. So this is my own power, my own energy that I have to put the tension on. Another problem is that the treadles down below are just kind of floating. So I have to kind of work my way around it to find the right treadle. At this point, another thing that I want to explain, especially for the people that are doing some overshot weaving in the traditional overshot patterns. A lot of people ask me, why don't you have a schedule in front of you to know which treadle to use? Well, anybody that knows colonial, traditional colonial overshot can sit here and weave this. I'm following a diagonal, and each square on the diagonal has to be squared. Now there is some method to this madness, because it's not just visually that it has to be squared. It has to be exactly the right number of pattern shots. The way to do it is to open the next one of that's not this one, so I can go down the treadles to find which one it is. Then I open it up and count how many warp ends there are. It's one warp end less than is needed that you put the pattern in. That way you just follow that line. So here I have it, and I'm taking my shuttles. As I mentioned, I always have to feel my way around to get the right treadle. So that slows things down. I'll give it a good area for the weft to fall in. I also have gotten into the habit of beating twice. It just gives me more of a rhythm, and it gives me a little bit of time to organize my next shot. So the loom, of course, isn't wide enough to make a coverlet to cover a bed. So traditionally, the coverlets were done in 2 panels and then sewn together. Luckily enough, so basically here is one repeat, there's another repeat, so there are 3 flowers and only half one here. And this has to be joining with the second panel. Luckily enough, this heavy beater is doing all the work. So I have been very lucky to have an even beat, because of course when you join it and it doesn't, it is a different height, well, it would show up terribly. So that's basically how the coverlets were done. So this one is on the light blue, and here, this is the previous one that I've done in the dark blue, or in the navy, the indigo blue. And again, against tradition, because usually the coverlets, of course, were with a light background and then a contrasting pattern thread. So now we can go over to the coverlets that I wove before. I mean, over the years, I have woven 18 coverlets on this loom, so which is I'm proud of. I'll show you the very first one that I wove, because probably that's the one that I'm proudest of, because it turned out well. It was kind of just hit and miss, but it was a good hit. So this is my very first coverlet I did on the old loom there. The warp goes this way, so I'm rather pleased that it's difficult to see where it's joined. It's actually right here, and I do have a technique that, since this is the selvage, that I embroider over it to make it look exactly the same as the next ones. So this is Beauty of the Lake, and I added the fringe later on to have a little bit more width to it. So here we have some other ones. This one, of course, is the Wandering Leaf. And thank you, JoAnne. This one is very pretty. I love this one. It's Queen's Anne's lace. This one is kind of psychedelic. It's the turkey tracks. And of course, the kids, when I demonstrate, they just love to look at this one because I can identify the imprint of a turkey track in the mud. And then here we have the Maltese cross. I usually make a border on my coverlets. It just frames it much nicer. Alan Macpherson, a good Scottish man, had the Macphersons had their own tartans, and it's the everyday tartan is predominantly red and would have been worn in kilts, especially as an everyday tartan and kilt. Then there's the dress tartan, and I made actually a blanket on the old loom of the dress tartan on a rather big scale. And as I mentioned before, the width of the loom commands that I had to do it in 2 panels. And so this blanket here is, again, here you see the seam. Hopefully you don't see it all that well, but I tried my best. Again, the beater has directed an even bead so that it fits very well. On a smaller scale, the same dress tartan poses quite different, a quite different appearance. This, of course, would be more the scale for kilts. Weaving tartan, oh, and then we also have, of course, the hunting tartan. Much more subdued colors. So this is the hunting tartan. All Macpherson tartans. Weaving tartans brings its own challenges. As a general rule, for kilts, you can lead the weft of each of the bands along one side of the material, of the selvage, because that side will be tucked in the hem, in the waistline. And so it doesn't matter that it's rather unsightly to see. However, if you weave it in a scarf or a runner or a blanket, then each one of those bands has to be woven in, otherwise it would show up very badly. So because of all this, it's a very labor-intensive weaving technique. Another thing is that each square should be completely even, no matter if you look at it the vertical direction or in the horizontal direction. Basically, that weaving, the technique, of course, itself, the interlacement is a 2-2-12 and doesn't pose any problems. So 13 years ago, the Laird asked me to weave a runner for the main staircase, as you can see here. That was quite a challenge for me, but I do like challenges. So anyway, I did do a lot of research. I went to the Grange, and the house there is of the same period of the Macpherson House. I was allowed to go into the young girl's bedroom, which had a wall-to-wall carpet, of course made up of strips. And I did a visual fiber analysis and came up with some ideas, designed my own stripe effect, as well as the color scheme, which I wanted to be an integral part of the house. So the mustard color, reflecting more with the paint of the floors, the lilac, it has a kind of a bluish lilac tinge in the walls. And of course the main charcoal is durable as to that it doesn't stain very easily. Over the 13 years, we had an average of 4,000 people a year come through the house. I'm very happy how it has kept up. The materials are, first of all, the warp was the Jason Collingwood rug yarns. It's 80% wool, 20% nylon, so durable that way. And the weft is the 2/8 wet spun linen, also very durable. You can see the wet spun, it's natural color, it's just a natural. You can see it a little bit at where the weft turns around the selvage, but not bad enough that it is distracting. The setup, I had set up as a 1, 2, 3, 4 on the loom at the shafts, and it was set at 20 EPI. The shed was very difficult because it was close enough that I couldn't get a very good shed. But so, although it is just a plain weave structure, it took me a long time to weave because I had to clear each single shed with a slab. So this is the main piece at that point, but now comes the pièce de résistance into the formal dining room. Obviously, the laird was pleased with my work of the staircase, and 13 years afterwards, he commissioned me by asking me to weave a wall-to-wall carpet for the formal dining room. I thought I had the experience enough with the runner that I could tackle this, and so I took it on. However, there were quite a few challenges. First of all, I started out with researching Venetian carpets. It has nothing to do with Venice, but anyway, they are called Venetian carpets. And you could see it in the morning room is another one. Quite a busy one. Basically, they were made up of strips and not mirror imaged. The strips were 2 main stripes, one more bold and one more subdued. As I mentioned, not mirror image. This was to prevent seeing how the strips join together. So if you can look later on, they are joined here, and the width of the strips is 35 inches. So I undertook first to make a floor plan to scale of this room. Then I had to figure out how many strips I would need. And at that point I could start with the design of the pattern. So once I had figured out how many strips I needed with the measurements, because the width of the Venetian carpet strips was between 18 and 40 inches. So here I was to decide how many strips for the whole room. I decided on 6. The alcove there would be part of it. So I started out with designing. The focus was to have it blend in again rather than take over the room. The elaborate curtains over there they were part of the restoration already, and I wanted to have it kind of blend in. And rather than to have it very busy, like the one in the morning room, I wanted it more subdued. Anyway, after coming up with a couple of designs, the laird approved this design, and I started out with making the warp. Well, first of all, ordering the yarns and the calculations and all these things that we are familiar with in weaving. I decided with 6 strips that I could probably have only 2 warps, each holding 3 strips, so with the 6 strips. However, it became quite obvious to me that my loom at home, I didn't weave it at this loom, wouldn't hold that weight, and that my equipment with making the warp wouldn't be suitable. So I had to alter my calculations with, of course, more loom waste to 3 warps, each having 2 strips. So basically, the weaving again was very slow, but I knew that of the runner that we had before, that I made before. In this case, I had to consider very closely that where the linen weft was making its turn was very even and a little bit extended, so that it facilitated the sewing of the strips together. The sewing of the strips together was an enormous job, which had to be done right here on site, because again, the volume of the project wouldn't have allowed it. Anyway, the pleasant part of it is, after many tribulations of sleepless nights, because I was afraid of things that I would be just 2 inches short and it wouldn't fit. However, it turned out to be working. I had an assistant helping me install the carpet. We tagged it all around. And then I made a little strip long enough, so only about 1 1/4 inch, to actually finish it over the threshold here and all along the outline. After all the work, and as I say, it was a challenge, it was difficult, I am very, very pleased and thankful that it turned out the way it did. Also, I had no idea how it would work with the stripe effect. And just by pure luck, or maybe still a little bit of my foresight, that it is very balanced into the room. So there is the heavy stripe there at the outline. There's the heavy stripe near the hearth, and there's the heavy colored stripe under the alcove. So it makes a very balanced effect. Also, the way the dining room table is situated is just lovely between 2 of the main strips. So anyway, this is basically what it all involved, and some more, but I won't get into that because I ran out of yarns and they were on back order. And the dye house had closed down, and I already had 2 strips woven and was just petrified that I couldn't finish it because I couldn't get the yarns for it. However, nobody that tramps on my work will ever know that I had many sleepless nights about it.
The architectural style of the house is a vernacular Georgian. The most striking feature of this style is its symmetry. The front and back doors mirror each other and are flanked by the same number of windows on each side. The first floor mirrors the second floor with large ornate windows above the doors and the smaller windows directly above those of the ground floor. The house was the first substantial private dwelling to be built on the north side of the river and for many years was the most substantial in this part of the town. Today, guests enter the house through the back door which faces Elizabeth Street, but the front of the house faces the Napanee River and was approached directly from the road to Kingston at the covered bridge on the river. As travelers descended the hill and crossed Palace Road, they would have been afforded a spectacular view of Mr. Macpherson's house to the north and his mills to the south. In 1962, the Lennox and Addington Historical Society purchased the house to preserve the structure and to restore the site to operate as a museum. The Macpherson House opened as a museum on August 5, 1967.